Hey guys, it's Derrick with On the Horizon podcast, and again, we are live from the NFR Cowboy Christmas, doing podcasts here from the Bedrock Truck Bed stage, and we have got Gillian Larson with Through Riders, and this is, I thought, really interesting. So you guys know a lot about how Horizon and Casper Companies and Circle Y are all sort of one big company now. We don't talk a lot about Tucker. So Tucker specifically is a trail riding saddle company that's also part of the family of Casper Companies. And we get a lot of questions from the guys who are wanting to do backpack hunting, backcountry horse trail riding. And so that is what you specialize in, right?
Yeah, not so much the hunting side of things, but if you're wanting to like ride in the backcountry and do it with or without a pack horse, like I've experimented with it all.
And when you say, it was crazy when you say experimented at all, like you've went over 14,000 miles on a horse.
Yeah,
Which
for
is
over
pretty
like
impressive.
the last decade. For the last decade I've been riding a lot in the backcountry and self-taught just because of where I grew up. I didn't have access to people that knew what they were doing. I wasn't big on social media or anything, so I didn't know how to find people. So it was a lot of learn by doing process.
So did you grow up with horses?
Yes,
Okay.
My mom was in the dressage world,
Oh,
so
right.
very different.
Yeah, no way.
Definitely no one in my family was in the backcountry world or backpacking or anything like it. So yeah, it was very, very much a pioneer in my little family. to do
So
that.
let's talk about that transition a little bit.
Yeah.
Because when you say backcountry, it means something to me from the hunting side of my head. I want to make
Yeah.
sure we're talking same.
Yeah.
So describe backcountry in your vernacular.
For me, it would be obviously anything where you're kind of getting away from a lot of like the day hikers,
Okay.
where you're getting far enough that you actually have to have gear to go overnight. For me, that's really like the difference of like the backcountry versus the front country.
Yep.
You're getting so far back there, you cannot just like go out for a day and come back out to your car. Like you
Yeah.
need to have like the equipment, the supplies. Obviously there's certain athletes that can get really far in
Yeah.
a day. So I think that they are kind of like the exception, but for your typical person, if you're getting to a certain point where you got to bring your gear with you.
Okay, so talk me through the transition then, because to do backcountry, equestrian style, did you do a lot of backcountry hiking beforehand? Like there's
Zero.
a whole, are you serious?
Zero. I had never even boiled water in the backcountry, like nothing.
So you're just one day woke up and you're like, you know what, I'm doing this thing.
Yeah, I was on I can't call it backpacking, but like in the Sierra Nevada, because I'm
Yep.
from California, they used to have quite popular. There's still a few in Yosemite, but this was when they still had some in other parts of the Sierra. These kind of like high Sierra camps where you basically just carry your clothes in with you. This camp that me and my mom would go to was like 11 miles. And so we just have our clothes. We didn't have to bring food or gear. And then they like put you up in like a, kind of like walled tent with a cot, and then they feed you. So it's a nice experience. You don't carry a big heavy pack. You just-
Easy intro.
Very easy intro. So that was like what I would do with my mom, when I was kind of in college and undergrad. We'd go out there in the summertime for like a 3-day thing.
Cool.
And so we were hiking out there, and she was telling me how she had read an article in the LA Times about a woman who had set the speed record for hiking the Pacific Crest Trail.
Oh, wow.
And she's like, somewhere out here in like this national park, we were in Sequoia National Park, she's like, the trail goes through this park. And this was my first time ever hearing of a trail that went Mexico to Canada. Didn't know such a thing existed. So that was really the part that blew my mind. And I couldn't help but then wonder, because I did ride horses.
Cool.
And I was like a day rider, a front country rider. And it just was like, I wonder if it's open to horses. And
Cool.
because of doing this High Sierra camp, occasionally we would see the pack trains that would resupply this camp. And I always just thought then packing was kind of like a professional gig. Like I didn't realize that you could ride in the backcountry with private stock either.
Yeah, see, and that's the part that fascinates me. I didn't realize that it's so accessible like that.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize, like I often am one of the few private stock people that does go into certain parts of areas with my animals. The rangers kind of recognize me, or they recognize my mule.
You're local. You're like a local to the backcountry.
Yeah, and like even before I had my mule, when I just had like brown horses, if they saw like one girl and like one pack horse, they're like, oh, the rangers obviously know I'm not an outfitter, but they would be like, oh yeah, they don't know my name or anything, but
So
they
you
would be
just-
like, yeah, we saw you 2 years ago out here, and I was like, yeah.
So you just caught the bug, and you were like, I'm gonna teach myself how to do this.
Yeah, I did. So it was that like trip, kind of like I was getting ready to graduate for my bachelor's degree, and
What'd
I
you
had
study?
Biology.
Okay, all right.
And I was going to go to grad school, and I was graduating in December, so I had a bit of a window, and I really just wanted to do something. And I'd kind of studied abroad the year before, and it was okay, but I really didn't have like this international travel bug.
Yeah.
And I really missed my horses and having them with me for that time that I was studying abroad. So I had been looking for something to kind of like hopefully, I was feeling burnt out obviously with school, and I was hoping to like do something about it, but I wanted to not leave my horses. So it was just like, this very like light bulb moment of like, I could do that trail. Like as soon as we got cell service, that's the first thing I Googled was like, can horses go on the Pacific Crest Trail? And like it said it was open to stock, and I was like right then and there.
There you go. I'm in.
Before I knew anything, I'm like, we're doing it.
That's
doing
awesome.
it. Yeah, but definitely my parents thought like I was
I was gonna say
very, very arrogant about it.
So did you have other horses at the time that weren't dressage, or were y'all?
Yeah, I didn't do dressage. This was my mom's thing.
So you go acquire like a pack horse?
I always had 2 horses.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a mare.
Not a pack horse, but
Yeah, I had a mare, and then we bred her, and so
Okay.
she had a colt when I was 15.
Okay.
So he was going on like 7 years old at the time. So I had a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old horse, and one was injured at the time. So I was also concerned about, well, what if my mare is not sound by the time I need to get on trail? So I better also buy gear for like single horse packing in case that's what it comes down to. And it ended up being important. So I did a kind of a mix of like packing and single horse packing on my Mexico to Canada ride.
So you say, just for clarification for everybody listening, when you say packing versus single horse packing,
Yeah.
I'm assuming that means you're taking a whole separate pack mule pack horse with all your gear versus packing everything on
the
one
riding
animal.
animals.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. So I kind of acquired gear for everything, and there's pros and cons to both. Like you get out of camp a lot faster with one animal. Riding in really rough country is a lot easier if you're not dragging a pack animal behind you. There's been times where I've had to like completely, untack and all the saddlebags off of my animal to like squeeze her through like some gnarly downfall where she's having to jump stuff. And like repacking like your pack animal alone when you have like 75-pound boxes is not a fun time on like narrow trail.
So when did you get hooked up with Tucker in terms of gear and all those kind of things?
After I did my second Mexico to Canada ride, I was pretty like, set on continuing and just trying to like make it part of my lifestyle to get into the backcountry every summer. And I'd been having some like saddle fit problems in terms of just getting the right situation for my mare. And it was a lot of buying saddles, and you can assess like if it's a really bad fit, you can kind of eyeball it. But when it's like you don't really know until you've kind of like put a couple 100 miles on. So that was a bit of a frustrating process. So Tucker was really nice. I just reached out to them. Like I didn't have any sort of social media, nothing, and just told them what I was doing. And they were really, really generous about like, hey, we would love to send you something. I didn't have any social media. So like, and all they asked of me was that I started Instagram. So that way they could have it.
That's pretty awesome.
So I wouldn't even have social media if it wasn't for Tucker.
Well, now you've got over
70,000. Tucker.
Yeah, you like 70.
Instagram,
yeah,
really,
that's what I was
have
thinking.
Instagram without Tucker. It was that was actually the way it went.
That's awesome. So you've got over 70,000 followers or whatever on Instagram.
Yeah, and it's actually allowed me to like grow my business and everything.
Cool.
I've just never had an interest in social media. It was just never my thing. I didn't even have a smartphone until I was going to go onto the trail, and I was like, you know what, having these navigation apps might be nice. So
do you use Onyx? What do you use for your navigation?
I like Gaia.
Okay.
I know.
Have you tried
Onyx is good.
Okay.
I know. I've heard really good things about it. I should get into it.
Those guys they're awesome individuals. We work with them on the hunting side, and it's just really, really good for knowing private and public land, but you should try it.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. No, I 100% think Onyx is an incredible app, incredible resource. So far, I've just been getting my needs met from Gaia.
Yeah.
But if I needed better intel on private versus public, because I was doing more cross-country stuff, that would be a necessity.
So tell me, going back on the saddle side, how did you pick, like, to me, it's hard to think how far that is from Mexico to Canada on a horse, right? And then I'm thinking, because, we grew up more in the cowboy world and ranch saddles and stuff, and I'm thinking, like, as much as I love my saddle, going that many miles seems like ridiculous.
Yeah.
So how do you pick one? You talk about fit, like how do you pick one that fits you and the horse? And like, is there something you recommend for somebody who's wanting to get into that? Like, hey, I'm serious about getting into backcountry riding, maybe backcountry hunting, camping, whatever. Like, where do I start for gear?
That's a good one. I think if you're going to be spending a lot of time in your saddle, like obviously it has to be good for you and the horse. I do think it's worth to not, especially if you're trying to do something, if you're like working as an outfitter and you're going to be out there for a long period of time, like all summer, you can't really have your horse get, sored up and keep doing your job with it. So I do think it's worthwhile kind of like getting a saddle like evaluated for fit, or the tree. Being able to actually see the tree on the horse is one of the only ways you can kind of get that idea. Pads are important. Like there's such a thing as over padding and under padding. An inch, 3/4 of an inch. That's kind of like what I go with. Wool, I think is important. It's easy to overthink certain parts of it. And then when it comes to, for like the person, also lightweight. If you're single horse packing, you're packing on your riding animal, weight does become a factor. If you're going like, 12 miles into the backcountry to set up like your hunting camp, you can definitely kind of like pack on more weight and not have to worry about it. But if you're trying to go 25 miles in the backcountry and you're going like multiple days of moving your camp, weight becomes more of an issue. Like your animal can pack in if it's in good shape. Like it can go over that 20% carrying capacity pretty fine.
That's
if you're just going in to like make like a base camp and then ride out from there, I think that's something that a lot of animals can do without it being adversely effective. But like I move my camp pretty much every single day and I pack all my gear. So for stuff like that, I really try to keep it at that 20% rule. So that's hard because then you're having to really think about weight.
Not only weight, but how many miles do you go a day on a single animal?
Yeah, I push it. Like I go far. I was doing, my longest days have been like in the 40s. And that's usually when something goes wrong, and so I'm having to like make up for it. Like it was never the plan to go 40s. But I would plan on doing like mid-20s to mid-30s. Like mid-30s are not fun days, but if that was where the grass was, if that's where a water source was, and I had to get to that location, like that's what we would do.
That was my next question. So when you're doing these, you're pre-planning out more or less based on, okay, I've got to get to water this horse or feed this horse in these intervals, so I've got to make it here or make it to
I'll have like a range, especially when you're doing like a Mexico to Canada ride. You have a window of opportunity. Like the window of opportunity is bigger down south because like the snow doesn't stick so long, and then the window of opportunity for getting over these high passes is a lot narrower up in like Washington and Montana and Wyoming because stuff doesn't melt out on the passes until sometime in July or in like a high snow year, even August. So a really, really high snow year, you can't even do some of these Mexico to Canada rides if you're going on like the high elevation routes because they just don't melt out in a way that's like time conducive.
It's crazy to hear you talk about this because like I've always loved, like I lived in Oregon for a while and I love just the whole history of like the Oregon Trail and like the big cattle drives and all those things. And it's like interesting, like when we go on family vacations, I always look at places and think, oh man, somebody rode across here with a horse and seeing that. So I'm sure I can imagine the emotion of like seeing some of this country from a horse would be absolutely
I know.
amazing.
I think the pioneers would probably think that, stuff like this is like idiotic. They're like, this is completely inefficient. You're riding like in like the highest elevation areas and like going places where there's not good grass. But obviously, especially pioneers when they're going, coast to coast, they are going kind of like perpendicular to the mountain ranges rather than like along them, but they would still have to get over them. Like, lots of people know about the Donner Party and like how
exactly.
well that went. Yeah, exactly.
So what's in terms of goals of yours? You seem like a very motivated individual. So when you think about like your backcountry, horse riding goals, what other things, or is there different trails you're looking to accomplish, or east to west even in the picture? Like what's next?
I don't think I'll ever go east to west because I do like the mountains. Like I do prioritize like the views that I get to see. I think I'm a little bit of like a view junkie. And sometimes those Mexico to Canada rides, like there's long stretches or a couple days where it won't be like ideal. Like I've done 4 of them now. And
have you done the same trail 4 times?
I've done the one 3 times and another one time.
Okay, cool.
I think I'd probably do like the Continental Divide Trail, maybe not all of it again, but like maybe 2,000 or so miles of it again. I would be okay with that. I have like some young horses. I'm kind of in that transition period. I have some young ones coming up, some old ones. Like I've had one of my horses who's been with me on all of these rides. He started as pack horse and he's kind of like been promoted to a riding horse, but he's getting up to be 18 now. So I would like to, let him start transitioning out, and like I have some young 4-year-olds, and so they'll kind of start picking it up. Yeah. honestly now one of my favorite things though is I like looking at maps and I like seeing places I haven't been and like reading the topography and being like the view from that pass would be epic. Like
so I gotta go there.
Yeah, I gotta
That's
go
cool.
there and see that view. And there's been lots of places I didn't get to see on the Mexico to Canada rides because that's just not where they went. Like I went to Hell's Canyon this last fall. Loved it. So beautiful. Never got to ride there because that's just not where my Mexico to Canada rides went. So I've enjoyed like kind of like now bouncing around like a little bit of like, you know, a nomad with a trailer and then packing for like a week or so in a beautiful place and getting to explore it. It kind of still gives me that like adrenaline rush of like seeing new country rather than just riding a trail I've done before. Like I think it's that new country experience that really does it for me more than necessarily a Mexico to Canada ride.
I think that's why, like, you know, we started talking early, and we want to talk more about your business too and how to get involved in it, because I have a desire to do some of that with my son on the horse side, because I love the, like I said, love the lifestyle. And for me on the hunting side, like I got to go to Alaska on a drop camp, you know, 10-day. We flew in, they dropped us 90 miles inside the Arctic Circle. Here's a sat phone, we'll come back and get you, right? And it's hard for me to describe to people, and I'm sure you feel the same way when you're on these passes. It's like I could be in a spot seeing things that nobody else has seen. And that is just like mind-blowing a little bit, to like be back away from, you can't hear planes, you don't hear people, there's no cell service. And so I'm like, to be able to experience that on the horse side would be absolutely amazing. So tell me a little bit with that, like, so part of your business is not just on the influencer side and doing these trail rides, but it's also bringing people into the space and teaching them how to do it.
Yeah, I would say I mostly focus on like education more than tourism, because at least like I felt like coming from the background I came from, there were resources available if you wanted to like learn how to be an outfitter. Like if you were wanting to be trained so that way you could go work for an outfitter or work as a guide, there were resources available where you could learn like all the different hitches, how to lead a string. But there wasn't a lot of info out there on like how do you plan and prepare to go somewhere you've never been, how, you know, if you don't have like the resources to have like a string, or what kind of gear is maybe more appropriate if you are like a private stock user versus like an outfitter. Like things are just a little different. Also, I just noticed that there was, you know, a certain demographic of women who had a really deep desire to go in the backcountry, but they just, again, they didn't have like the finances to have a big string, and there's just like a bit of a financial barrier or an intimidation factor of, do I have to do it this way? And I'm very much like, you know, what works for you works for you, and I try new things all the time. I think that's part of the fun of it, and figuring out under what circumstances it's applicable. Like riding in the desert is a very different strategy than riding in, you know, above tree line, and like what kind of containment works best. What kind of challenges do you have to worry about more? I think that's an interesting thing. Like a lot of people don't get to go riding in new places or new environments and kind of like test the limits of when certain, you know, things work or don't work.
Well, not only that, but like you mentioned earlier, we see it in the hunting space is people want to learn those things. How they want to learn those things is different now, right? So, you know, I think there's a lot of intimidation factor of somebody just jumping into it or feel like they're going to do it wrong or get made fun of. And so we see that on what we try and do with like even this podcast. It's like, how do we educate people so they can go find information and then be enough that they feel confident that they can go do things?
Yeah, because there's even stuff out there that allows you to basically pack on your riding saddle. Like there's ways that you could, you know, if you're trying to go in somewhere that has like not maybe the greatest of conditions, and you're like, how do I, or pack out like your meat, you know, you can take in an animal with you and then like, you know, lead it out with like your elk on it, so you don't have to like pack out your animal. Like there's ways that you can take one or two animals with you in the backcountry to like bring your, you know, your elk out or your deer out with you. And I don't know, it's like a creative process. Like it's like problem solving. Like how creative can you get with your problem solving, and what resources you have and your goals, and how do you make those two things come together? Because everyone has different goals and also different resources available to them. And I don't think that you have to follow a prescriptive plan to make what you want your backcountry experience to be come true. So for me, that's the fun side, is how can I hear what someone's goals are for getting out there, and how can I make it possible for them?
And you do that both in a personal training scenario and through, you're talking about doing that online as well. So tell us a little bit about how the training, like how does somebody find you, and then what training opportunities you offer to like get somebody started in this?
I do workshops, and I mainly focus on people that want to like be private stock users in the backcountry, whether it's packing or not.
And private
packing.
stock user meaning you've got your own horse or a horse that's not a outfitter's
like
horse.
If someone's wanting to guide or become like an outfitter or any way in kind of like the professional thing, I think it's better for them to go learn from a professional and like learn all the different hitches and like how you pack out different varying loads. When you're a private user, you're pretty much packing the same thing every day. And you kind of don't want to have like this information dump of, 10 different hitches. And you kind of want more info on like the planning side of things. Like how are you going to go a place? When you're a commercial user, you only have a commercial permit for a certain area. You can't bounce around a whole lot. But when you're a private stock user, you can go anywhere and everywhere you want to for the most part.
Interesting.
So you're not so limited. So that means you might be riding in new places a lot more than like an outfitter that's kind of going to the places they know and the camps they know.
I never thought about that. That's interesting. So you can actually, as a private citizen, doing it yourself, you can actually go to places that an outfitter won't be able to take somebody else.
Yeah. To take a client somewhere, there's rules you have to follow, and you have to have a commercial permit, and you have to have the insurance. And so a lot of outfitters, like they might have to learn a new area, the first year, maybe 2. But once they know their camps and their trails, like there's not a big planning side of it. And when it comes to being a private stock user and you're wanting to like put your horse in the trailer and go to a new state and ride there that you've never been, the planning side of things is much heavier than anything. So I focus more on kind of like the planning side and like how do you know what permits to get? How do you know where to camp when you've never been there before and you don't have someone saying, go to such and such meadow and there's a beautiful lake there? Like how do you do that on your own if you don't have someone to ask? So that's kind of more what I focus on.
So your workshops are based out of where?
Based out of where I live on the Central Coast of California when they're in person, mostly because I try to make it a little more of an experience. So people bring their horses. There's kind of like a classroom side of things. And then we also go on like just some like rides just to like have like that enjoyment side of things and connection. But then in order to, because not everyone can trailer a horse all the way to the Central Coast of California, I also then made an online course. So that way people can still get the information that they need. It's basically the exact same information.
So is it a video series or is it you teaching an online course over a certain amount of time?
It's more of a video series, so it's self-paced. There's also a lot of written stuff. I go over like satellite imagery and like how to read like snow info and that kind of stuff. And then if you take like a workshop or the online course, you then qualify for doing kind of like a guided overnight ride with your horse. So some people, they learn all the steps, and then I noticed that there was sometimes a threshold of people then going into the backcountry because they were still unsure about doing it solo and for a first time. And it was just, they just wanted to know that the campsite they're going to will be safe.
The one time under your belt so you could then go.
And just I think sometimes people imagine like the worst case scenario and they're like, what if that happens? Like what if my horse runs off? And what if like the campsite that I think I'm going to doesn't work out? And, they're just a little nervous. And so being able to go with someone and it makes it a little easier. Like I make sure we have like a couple video, check-ins beforehand where like they've practiced their stock containment, they have all the right gear. I help them make sure that they're all prepped and ready. I pick the trailhead, I have the route mapped out. They can practice using like the navigation if they're like uncomfortable with it.
That's cool.
It's been a really fun experience. And then I also do like trip consults. So if people don't want to go on a guided overnight, but they want help planning a trip, like I'll help them plan a trip to a place they haven't been before. So that way, to have just like has that extra like verification of like, this is a good route for you. This is a good route for horses. Here's where you can camp.
So how does somebody, where do I find that at? What's the website? How do I get signed up? And part of this is just like selfish, right? Like, I want to do this real bad myself. So how do I go find
the limit.
I know it sounds super awesome. So how do I find your website, or how do I get signed up for a workshop?
So my website's probably the main one. It's pretty easy to find. It's my name, GillianLarson.net.
Okay.
So pretty easy. Even if you just Google it, or especially Gillian Larson or like Through Rider, which is like my Instagram, I pop up pretty quickly. So it's not too difficult to find me. Through Rider, THRU_rider is my Instagram handle. That's like really my main social media platform. that I also can, have links to my website through there as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, and we're gonna grab some Tucker saddles and head out your direction here pretty soon.
Amazing.
We're gonna make this happen.
Yes.
For sure. So
yeah, we're gonna do like a Tucker trip.
I love it. I think it's a great idea. But thank you so much for doing the podcast with us, and I'm encouraged and learning about what you're doing there, and looking forward to doing more stuff with you in the future. I think that's awesome. But guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of On the Horizon podcast. Be sure and like and subscribe, and check us out, and check Gillian out if you're looking forward to your next backcountry hunt trip, or just getting in the backcountry, learning more about it, especially doing it on horseback. Yeah. So appreciate it, guys. We'll catch you later.